same me, 365 more days of being able to say, welcome to the most overrated, underappreciated, most viewed, underviewed podcast of all time. Welcome to the Prince of Fresh Air. I am, of course, your host. If you don't know, now you know, the most charismatic man in entertainment. No, I'm not stealing from Dwayne The Rock Johnson for people who keep asking. New year. And before I introduce my next guest, I got to say one thing. 4 years into this podcast, I would never have thought that I would have made it this far. And it's because of all you people listening, whether you hate my hair, you hate the charisma, you enjoy everything about the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, because without you, I wouldn't have been able to be on multiple magazines, reaching new world countries and all types of stuff. So thank you. Now, let me stop the charade here and let me introduce my next guest. I am a huge fan of this guy. I was actually just watching his live stream on YouTube. He is a full-time MMA journalist for publications such as Sportskeeda MMA, Middle Easy, and Fanatics View. He also produces the Gambler's Perspective on UFC Fight Pass. That's right, you heard that right. And he also produces the NFL podcast for Fantasy Life. The man behind Lynch on Sports, the man, the myth, the legend, James Lynch. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you for having me, man. It's great to be here. Appreciate you extending the invite, man. Absolutely.
I'm thankful that you actually took the opportunity, because I know a lot of people, they get a little scared away with the charisma, but you're a guy who
I can handle the charisma. We're good. Yeah,
exactly. All right. So James, before we get into this thing, I got a bone to pick with, not with you, with Canada. All right. So George St. Pierre, if you hear it, don't shoot me. All right. Don't hurt me. So James, I know you're an NHL guy, right? You love NHL. I'm an NHL guy as well. I know you're from Vancouver, so you have the Canucks. No problem with them. But I'm a New Yorker, and I love the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Washington Capitals. Front runner, I know. But it came to my attention, but when you came on, I said, I can have him apologize. So I'm a New York Islanders guy, right? So James, on behalf of Canada, can you apologize for John Tavares for running away from New York Islanders? Please, just one sorry.
I can't do it, because here's the thing. There's multiple parts of Canada. That's like saying is something in like a state of the U.S. going to apologize for it? Like, Canada's a big place. People in Vancouver don't like people in Toronto, so we're not even benefiting from it. So I thought you were going to say Bo Horvat, because we traded. I'm a Canucks fan. We traded Bo Horvat to you guys, and that trade looked like it's worked out well for both sides. But listen, I will say this. John Tavares did do the Islanders dirty. You should have let them know that he wasn't coming back. They should have got some assets for him. I'm with you there, but I can't apologize, because I'm not like a big Toronto Maple Leafs fan.
All right. I was just kidding. I don't really.
No, I know, for sure. No, I like the setup though. I can't personally apologize for something that I had nothing to do with. So
yeah, fair enough. But sometimes you got to take responsibility. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing.
It's all good. Did you know? And I was telling someone this the other day. Did you know that in Canada is very, very big, obviously, but Canada also has the same population as California. That's how few people live in Canada, but it's so big and spread out that obviously it's a lot bigger than California. You know what I mean? Which is kind of crazy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's people are always surprised by that. Also, did you know that it doesn't snow everywhere in Canada? This is also something that confuses people. Like in Vancouver, where I live, it's basically the same weather as Seattle. We're only 3 hours away from Seattle, so it's
really?
Almost the same. Yeah, it snows in the mountains, but I didn't have a white Christmas. I haven't seen snow in a year. And when snow does come, it's very it'll come and then it just washes away. It's not anything that sticks. I've lived in Eastern Canada before. I've lived in Toronto. I've been to Montreal. That it snows over there for sure, but here in Vancouver, not so much.
I did not know that. I haven't been to Canada. I'm not a world traveler yet. I'm getting there though. I'm getting there.
Yeah, let's go. You can't just hop on a flight. It's a couple hours even to go to Toronto. It's not too bad, right? So
yeah, it's just I'm tired of people asking me for autographs when I go to the airport.
I get it, man. You trust me. You get bombarded all the time. I got to wear the shades and the hat and everything. It's not easy, right?
It's funny because I actually do wear shades most of the time, but today I was like, it's a little cloudy in New York, so I'm gonna skip it today. But enough of this. All right, let's get into you, because like I said, I'm grateful that you took the time to come on the podcast. Like I said, I've been following you for the last year. I watch all your live streams and Q&As and all your opinion videos and stuff like that. But before we get into those, how did you even get involved with MMA? Because everybody usually has a story of some sort. How did you get involved with it?
So I'm in university. Like most Canadians, I wanted to get into hockey and do like hockey broadcasting. That was always the goal. I played hockey growing up. Still a big hockey fan. Hockey's still like one of my favorite sports. But when I got to university, I sort of discovered mixed martial arts. Like as far as watching it, never trained. I always throw that out there. And got to remind people, Bill Belichick never played an NFL game, so don't criticize me. Okay, Belichick one of the best coaches ever. But yeah, I really got into it. Like it was the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. I was in university at the time, and I was like, "What is this show?" And I kind of got hooked. And then I started watching every pay-per-view. And then fast forward, like just as I was finishing up school, I kind of had a decision like which direction I wanted to go in. And I ended up living in Toronto at the time and started working at the Fight Network, which at the time was covering MMA and doing like all types of combat sports. And Mauro Ranallo was there. Mauro Ranallo obviously does the voice of boxing, and he's the voice of Bellator, or what's left of Bellator, I should say. So I was very lucky early on that I got like exposed to that, and then just sort of kind of give you the short version here. A couple of years later, I left Fight Network, worked in like the television industry, like digital media industry for like a number of years, and was doing MMA stuff on the side, doing interviews and other things. And then got to the point where when I became a dad, I couldn't do both because I was kind of doing the MMA stuff on the side and doing my day job. So I quit the day job in 2017. Went into MMA full time as a freelancer, and I haven't looked back. And that's my very mediocre story of how I got into doing this full time. There you go.
Yeah, in the words of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that's the bottom line, So I had to throw that in there.
Great reference. I was an Attitude Era guy back in the day. Don't watch much pro wrestling these days, but anything from the Attitude Era, I will smile at, like I just did there. So,
yeah, I didn't grow up in the Attitude Era. That was a little bit before my time, but.
You're saying I'm old here? No, I am old. It was just my birthday the other day, actually. So there you go. So
I was on the live stream and you mentioned your age, which I won't do.
No, it's okay. Listen, I know a lot of women don't like their age out there. I'm 39. Don't have to hide it. I'm embracing it. Last year in my 30s, I'm going to make it count. What can I say?
Well, I'm 28, so
there you go.
We're not So I gotta say, I got into it because John Jones. I'm a big fan of John Jones. He's the one that got me involved. Yeah, this was. Yeah, 10 years ago when I first went to college, I was looking for something on the treadmill to watch, and I came across John Jones on YouTube, and that's how I started watching it. That's how I started training. So I'm a huge fan of John Jones, and I've been a fan since. So I watch it all the time. So with that being said, though, since you are into MMA, what led you to the career of being a journalist?
Well, I went to school for like basically media studies. Like I have a communications degree, and then I did 2 years of like a television broadcasting program at a college here in Canada. And I always knew I wanted to be on camera and do like that type of work. And I just did it a bit differently. Like traditionally, the way you would get on camera, like back in the day, if you were in television, was like you move out to a small town and you get like a job there and then you work your way up. I didn't want to do that. I'm like, I still want to like party and have fun. So I moved to Toronto, which was great. And because there's a lot of media jobs in Toronto, and sort of worked my way there. And then I was kind of realizing at Fight Network, like I probably was not going to get on camera just because they already had like a number of broadcasters working there. So I just started doing stuff on the side, like digitally. And then it just so happens that like, that's everything now. Like everyone is doing what I'm doing now, which is remote video interviews. And so that's kind of where like I kind of made this into my own thing. Like I created my own job, like, and I do it a bit differently than most people, because like most people that do this full time in the industry, they work for like an MMA junkie or MMA fighting or one of those big outlets, and it's like a full time gig. For me, I do it a bit differently, where I work for like a number of different companies, and that makes up what would be like a full time salary. And then I also do other stuff like producing and everything, like all these things that basically make sure I can keep the lights on, pay my mortgage, feed my kids, all that good stuff.
Oh yeah, that's phenomenal. I remember I was watching a live stream, or I think it was actually. I think you did an opinion piece about how you got into full time. It was a podcast you had on your.
I know it was a video I made from a couple of years ago. The reason I do it, actually, by the way, just so people know, like I get asked these questions all the time, like how did you get into MMA? How do you cover UFC events? So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to make videos for this and just send people the link, so I don't have to keep repeating myself. And that way too, like I make sure I get all my points across, because maybe if I am explaining something, I might miss something. So it's there forever on my channel that people can see, and it's more of like a guide. And then I always tell people like, hey, have a watch. If you have any other questions, more than happy to answer them. That type of thing.
Absolutely. I agree with that. But, unfortunately, people don't usually take the time to to watch the video, so they always ask the same questions. So
for sure, but I think in my case, like if you're looking for a specific answer on something, then I can like at least I have a video that does it. And one of the ones that I get asked a lot is like, how do I record my interviews? Like I have an entire video on like how I do that. So I've had a lot of people be like, hey, thank you for like showing me how to do that, because it was a lot of trial and error over the years of like figuring out what's the best way to record my interviews and all that. And so it's kind of been an evolution in that sense.
Yeah. So the pleasantries have been extended. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of it, because I like I said, I know you're a busy man. Thank you again for taking the time.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. All good. Happy to be here. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
it's the most charismatic way, So, but let's get into everything, right? Because this one question I actually want to start off with is a question that I've seen on your live streams. A lot of people ask something that the MMA, Twitter, and all this stuff you can see on social media. This is a question that comes up a lot. There's been a rise of content creators such as Nina, who I'm a big fan of, and then we have full-time journalists like yourself. So, recently, a couple months ago, I actually had a guy on who he was a journalist, and he was more into the music aspect. So he was doing a lot of interviews with high-profile musicians and stuff. But one of the things he said was, I enjoyed journalism, but it started becoming a hassle. Meaning, and this is the point I'm making is, people see Nina, right? And like I said, I love her content, but some people might say she's ruining journalism. But for you, is there a space that both can, take over in MMA and still work together? Or do you think that content creating is kind of hurting, what you do, your profession?
Well, see, I'm in an interesting position because I kind of do both. Like I do sort of the journalism thing with like my interviews and all that. And then I have my own YouTube channel where I'm a bit more of like a personality as opposed to like a straight edge journalist. I mean, if we're doing real journalism, then we should be covering, fighter pay and like things that are really important, not like Conor McGregor said this to some other fighter. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of news that you typically see covered. Now, I wouldn't say Nina's a journalist. She's a content creator. I don't think she does do any journalism. I mean, I don't think it's any secret, and I'm not like bursting anyone's bubble here. Yeah. But like Nina is paid directly by the UFC. The UFC promotes her content on their social feeds. She's doing fight announcements for Dana White, which turned out to be power slap announcements, like that type of stuff. So, I mean, by an extension, she's just sort of like an extension of the UFC's PR to a certain degree. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I'm not, and I feel like you as well, like good for her. She's found like a great gig here. They send her all over the world. She gets to do all this cool content. Like it's something that obviously the fans like and they resonate with, but that's not journalism. That's not the same as what, other people in the space are doing in terms of, doing interviews and other stuff. And so that's why, like, it kind of annoys me, to be honest, when I hear people say like, oh, Nina's such a breath of fresh air in journalism. I'm like, but she's not doing journalism. Like you can't work for an employer that you're covering, right? Like that's not really like, listen, I know journalism's totally different now than what it used to be back in the day, but you got to have some sort of morals. Like some of the things that I don't do, I don't take photos with fighters. I don't say a fighter sucks or anything. Like I try and be like, if I'm going to be critical, I'm going to do it in a respectful manner. Like these are things that you do, whereas like Nina can get away with asking like a fighter's dick size and it's not going to be a big deal because like that's her thing, right? But that's not really journalism. That's more of just like creating cool content. So I guess to answer the question is like, I think this almost reminds me a bit of like when bloggers and like newspaper people were like fighting back in the day. It's just something that has to blend together. And I think that's what you're going to see going forward. Like I talked about this in other videos, like you can't ignore guys like MMA Guru and Jesse on Fire and these big YouTube channels because they do make up a big portion of the audience and the viewership is there. And it's not like buying views or anything. It's like you see the engagement. They are really tapping into an audience that people have an appetite for. And maybe that is the people getting bored of the typical, fighter questions and stuff. And I get that. There's some stuff I hate hearing at pressers all the time. Like, do you think you're like, they just, stupid questions that you get at pressers. And that's people that just are not being innovative in how they're asking things. So I think it can coexist. I just think for now, they're two sort of separate entities, content creation and journalism. I think they're very different.
No, you hit it right in the head. And that was actually a question I was going to ask, because a lot of people will say, hey, the media, Nina's such a breath of fresh air because the media asks the same questions. But I think one of the points you mentioned, people can be a little more creative, which we, in that space, you have the Schmo, Helen Yee. You do have, people with brands and who are journalists who do ask those type of questions. But I think people forget that it is a business, and you're not going to, just like in NBA, you're not going to see reporters asking, Tom Aspinall with his, with the size of his nuts are,
Well, not to mention she's a woman. Like imagine if a male imagine the schmo starts asking, like a female fighter those questions. There's no way he could get away with that. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that wouldn't fly, right? Like right. I did a video on this on my channel talking about, because there was someone going after Helen Yee about Nina drama and like comparing the two. And I'm like, they're two completely different people. Nina works for the UFC. She literally just like the UFC is like, hey, we have this fighter available. Go interview them. Obviously Nina comes up with her own concepts and does like all the, fun back and forth. But Helen actually like doesn't have any UFC connections. She has to go to the gyms, do the regular interviews. And, people say the questions are boring, but there's people who might want to know how a fighter's training camp's going and all this different stuff. Betting has become a huge part of MMA. I can't tell you how many people message me saying, thank you for this interview, because they want to know it from like a betting perspective. They're going to bet on the fight. So there is still a need for those like regular kind of, state-of-the-art questions or whatever, like the sort of the regular questions you get in like a typical fighter interview. But then there's the other side where people want to see other fighters open up. And so I think there's room for both, like I said.
Yeah, there is room for both. And I think one of the questions I would ask you is, we are in a social media era, right? And you, the Shmuel, Helen, there's a couple others in that space who have a brand. You have your YouTube channels, you have your own identity. Do you think, and I love Ariel Helwani, he has his own thing too. Do you think it's going to get to the point where a lot of journalists don't need the MMA junkies to thrive anymore? They can just do their own thing, get those credentials to the fights, and do what they what they want to do?
It's going to be interesting. One thing I have noticed, and I know it's not the be all end all, because I'm sure like the website traffic that like MMA Fighting and MMA Junkie and all these sites get, I'm sure is still really good. But the one thing you do look at is you look at guys like Guru and Jesse on Fire, like they're getting way better numbers on their YouTube channel than like Junkie or Fighting, or even like Mac Life sometimes, because they're just tapping into something that they can't really talk about. Like MMA Guru can make an entire video on how much he hates Merab Dvalishvili, and there's like sort of this self-loathing fan that like loves something like that, right? But you're not going to get that on an MMA Junkie. You're going to get the typical, like, what do you think Connor should do if he doesn't fight Chandler? Like that type of stuff, right? Like it's going to be just your typical fight stuff. So I guess I think there still is a demand, like I said, for the regular sort of bland media stuff. Like I think that will always be there. And obviously like they're still able to send people to events and stuff. But I also think it's tough for I think it's also tough for like a lot of these sites to make like a ton of let's put it this way. I think there was more money in MMA media years ago than there is now, because the content side has sort of caught up to everything.
Yeah. And truth be told, when you have like UFC and Nina, when you have people you can keep in your close circle that can do those interviews. I know Sean Strickland, he got his big break because of Nina. She was able to do things where
I want to correct that actually. That is a narrative that's out there. I would actually go a step further. I know Nina certainly helped. Helen and Schmo were actually interviewing him far before that and would do the gym interviews. And if you look at a lot of the clips that have been surfaced around online from Strickland, they're ones that are at the gym. I know Nina's obviously all over Instagram, and you see like the ones with her and Strickland in like a desert or whatever they are. But I wanted to point that out, that I think Helen and Schmo deserve some credit for doing those gym interviews, because that was obviously back when Strickland was just starting to get popular. Nina obviously took it to another level, and Nina's done a great job. I'm not trying to discredit her, but I hear a lot of people mention that Nina made Strickland. I think you got to go back even further and look at what the Schmo and Helen did. Another quick thing I wanted to mention before we skip over this is I think another thing that's really changed the game is fighters doing their own YouTube channels, right? You have Cormier, you have Henry Cejudo, you have Bisping. It's honestly hurt my business to a certain degree in terms of doing my interviews, because there's a lot of fighters now that don't do as much media, because they'll either want to do it on a fighter's channel, or the fighter themselves has their own YouTube channel. So they don't really see the need to do any media. So to some degree, that's kind of hurt what we're doing as well. Like Bisping, like even now, like I have to look at Bisping's channel and be like, who did he get on? Because like I typically don't like doing a lot of interviews if someone else has done the same interview with them, just because, there's not usually a ton to talk about outside of that. You can try and be creative, but I think in a lot of ways you got to kind of figure that. So that's another thing that's kind of changed the game, as well as fighters doing their own YouTube, which is fine. But there's a part of me that's like the old school journalism side of me is like, you kind of want to have a media guy in there too, because maybe they're not going to answer the questions you want answered. Because if it's their YouTube channel, they're only going to give you their side of things. Sometimes you need to be challenged on your own ideas.
Yeah, no, you're right. And to backtrack what you said about Helen Yee and the Schmo, I 100% agree. That's how I found out Sean Strickland watching the interviews with him. I was just more referring to the people who don't necessarily...
I know what you meant for sure. I know there's like a narrative out there that like Nina made Strickland. It's like, I don't really agree with that. Like, I think it definitely added it was sort of the right timing. Strickland becomes champ and Nina's doing all these interviews. But like, if you go back even like, COVID and all that, they were in the gym and that, it's hard to do those interviews too, because they're after practice. There's other people around. Like, I commend them. Helen and the Schmo, they're one of the few people that go do gym interviews. And I think those are the best interviews because guess what? You're getting the fighters in their element. They're in the gym. Exactly. This is where they are best. They're not, sitting at a press conference with a bunch of lights and a bunch of strangers that are asking them questions. They're more in their element. So I always preferred the gym interview as well. And that's why even when I go to Vegas, I try and go to those gyms and get some content there because it's better than just, especially the way the UFC does the media now. I'm going to quickly go on a tiny rant here. Like before COVID, they used to do media day where it used to be one-on-one interviews where like a fighter would sit on a chair, you'd line up and you'd interview them. Now it's just the press conference where like the fighter comes out and it's whoever like puts their hand up and they get to ask a question. And here's the thing, I could ask a really good question and it could go, viral or whatever, right? Like it doesn't matter. But like I ask the question. So like MMA Junkie can use that clip. MMA Fighting can use that clip. It doesn't matter because we're all in a press conference setting. But if I was to do a one-on-one, I own that clip and I get all the credit. But like if I ask a good question, you think Junkie's going to be like, well, James Lynch answered that question. No. So that's where I kind of don't like the way they do the press stuff now because it's just whoever uploads their YouTube video the fastest. That's basically it,
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't think about that. That's actually a good point. And I know others like boxing does the same thing where they do the press conferences too, and they don't unless you catch the fighters when they're leaving. Or I do know like during fight week they'll normally have blocks for fighters to come out and do interviews with DC check-ins and stuff like that. But I don't know do you think it'll ever change though?
I don't know. I think the UFC is kind of happy. It's probably easier for them to schedule because the fighter only has to be there for the time. Like, let's say a fighter comes out for like what? I think it's like 20-minute blocks or something. So let's say a fighter comes up for 20 minutes instead of coming out for an hour, right? Because like, or like longer. Although I guess you would still do 20 minutes with the fighter. No, I think they gave you a bit longer if I remember correctly. I think the fighter stays out a little bit longer than the 20 minutes. But the downside to that, I guess, is if let's say there's a huge line, because this used to happen. I remember like, going to like, I remember covering one of the John Jones cards, like everyone's lined up to interview Jones and it's more of like a media scrum. And then you might not get another fighter because like you didn't have time, right? Because they only have a certain block that they're out there. So I guess the only benefit is you're going to get every fighter, but the downside is you don't get that one-on-one thing. You only get what, it's you're all in the same room doing like a press conference style thing. So which I don't like. I would rather go back to the old way. I'd like to go back to the chaotic, like do I wait here for 5 minutes and get this really good fighter and potentially miss out on two other fighters, or do I get the two other fighters and just try and get more content? Like you have to weigh those options basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just to switch gears a little bit because there's a lot of things we could talk about, and I know, like I said, I know you got something else to do, so I want to talk about something specific.
Sure. And
I've talked about this on the podcast before. But because you're in the know-how, certain people, and you've been involved with this, you have a understanding of this topic. Now, we both do, we're in front of the camera, but you're more behind the scenes, journalism and stuff like that. I'm more of like the actor being in front of camera. So I understand sports entertainment. And recently, the reason why I brought it up, because I know you interview Colby Covington a lot. And during the fight with Leon Edwards, he said a lot of things about Leon's father. Obviously, we know about Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis, and Conor McGregor, all the trash talkers in the world. I know you've openly talked about trash talk and how you're not a huge fan of it to promote fights, but a lot of fans say, "Hey, trash talk sells and makes the fight engaging." I know Colby Covington has said, "Hey, Leon Edwards don't sell pay-per-view, so I got to do something." Do you think trash talk, because this is going to be a big thing forever in the sport, do you think trash talk should be regulated in the sport?
No, it shouldn't. And to clarify what you said there, I'm not a fan of trash talk when it's talking about people's families. I think Colby crossed the line there. I love Colby. I love interviewing him. He's great. He crossed the line talking about Leon's dad. I know Leon's dad wasn't necessarily a good guy, but that doesn't matter. We should leave that stuff alone. But you can't police trash talk, because you start doing that, then no one's going to watch the fights. You need some sort of build up. I would prefer, and I think Dana White feels the same way, is not going that low. Like even Drake is talking about Strickland's childhood and stuff. Like come up with something clever. Like there's plenty of things you could talk about with fighters, like I just think it's almost kind of like an easy thing to do is to go to the jugular and talk about Leon's, dad. Like, why not talk about other stuff? Why not talk about the fact that Nate Diaz almost knocked him out in their fight? Like, stuff like that you could focus more on, and I think just be more creative with trash talk than going the route of like talking about the family. Because I think for most people like older, like not in their early 20s, I think most people see that type of trash talk with the family stuff and they're like, I don't need to see that. I don't think a lot of fans are cool with that. I think it's better if you can become creative. Like when Strickland did his whole thing, I'll never forget this. So I was at the press conference for the Israel Adesanya and Cannonier fight, and that was the same card that Sean Strickland fought Alex Pereira. And Sean Strickland stole the show going after Izzy, talking about his anime and all this different stuff. And like, if you go watch that presser, Strickland won like everyone over with that. And I remember thinking like, geez, like this is the way to do it. Like, attack something that like, and again, that's not offside. He's just talking about Israel Adesanya, talking about watching anime, and he's talking about all this stuff, and he was making fun of media. Like, Strickland is a natural comedian. Like, I have never seen anyone like this in our sport. Just, again, you don't have to agree with everything he says, but he's very good at like roasting people and like saying funny stuff, and like it's totally natural. And I think that's why Strickland's become sort of this cult favorite now with the UFC, because they like, he's a funny guy. Like, you want to listen to what he says. Whereas I think there's other fighters that try and do that same thing, and you can just tell it's either fake or it just doesn't come across as well, right? So, I think, to answer your question, you can't police trash talk. I'd prefer if they didn't talk about the families, but I also understand they're fighters and they beat the crap out of each other. So, they're probably a little bit different than you and I.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And trust me, Chael Sonnen, you know him, one of my favorite trash talkers, because he was clever. He knew how. He didn't curse. He didn't talk about people's children. But one of the things I think the problem is that the fans are the ones that are creating this atmosphere. And I know Kobe Covington, he said this, when on your interviews and plenty of other interviews, how, he was winning fights. And then the UFC was like, hey, during Brazil, we're going to cut you. You're not selling fights. And so he decided, hey, if I want to make money and stay in the UFC, let me go to this persona. I'm not trying to out him anything. But I think a lot of fighters realize, hey, if I don't sell the pay-per-views, if I don't sell my brand, I'm not going to get the main event slots. I'm not going to get the money that comes with it. Do you think that when trash talk, do you think that the UFC should at least impose fines? Because I know some people have said, hey, maybe Dana should pull him aside and reprimand him behind closed doors or something. Do you think he should do something like that, or you think he's just like, hey, it is what it is?
Yeah, it's the only problem is like, what do you define as like bad trash talk or not? Like that's the only issue. Like, who decides that? Who says what's offensive, what isn't? It's, and especially nowadays, like with how everything is, like with social media, like people are getting in trouble for all types of stuff, right? So I think, like, I don't mind that idea. I just think it's very hard to like determine what is worse than what's more across the line or not. Like, is it across the line to talk about someone's dead father, or is it across the line to talk about someone's child abuse growing up? Like, how do you determine what's worse than the other? You know what I mean? Or are they all bad? We find them all. Like, it's that's where I think you get into a little bit of a tough situation. Because not every fighter does this, right? Like, it's not like every fighter is going out there and talking trash and like going straight for the jugular in terms of like personal stuff. So I understand that, but I do think there is pressure on fighters to like try and build up a fight. But I think there's other ways to do that. There's, being interactive on social media. It's being talking to fans. Like, those are ways that I think you can build up a brand without having to do like the one-liners. Like, I think Ian Gary is someone who's doing this in the complete wrong way and losing fans instead of gaining them. Like, he's going after the wrong people. Like I said, my thing with Ian Gary is like, I don't think his trash talk's terrible, but you're like attacking the wrong people. Like Jeff Neal, like what's Jeff Neal done that like, no one like has a feeling about Jeff Neal. Like, if Ian Gary had gone after Colby, I think he would have won people over, because there's people who hate Colby. You're going after Jeff Neal, you're going after Neil Magny, going after Vicente Luque. You're talking about three of the nicest guys in the UFC. You're not going to win people over that way. And that's why, like, I think it's hilarious when people are like, I can't believe Ian Gary's getting all this hate. It's like, I can. He's kind of trying to bully guys that aren't like, like trash talkers. Like, you're going after a Colby or Connor or some of these guys. Fair enough. That's their persona, but attacking people that really don't want any business of it, that's kind of a lame move, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it all stems from, I think the only way this is going to at least clean itself up is if fans and even media and other fighters, if they hold everybody to the same standard, right? Because I know, years ago when Khabib and Conor was fighting, Conor was saying all types of stuff about Khabib's religion and family, and people was laughing it up. And now, people are mad at Sean Strickland for, making jokes too. So I think for me personally, as a fan, I love the trash talk. I don't really co-sign people talking about people's families and children. But I do think it's a necessary part of the sport, because how are you going to sell the fights if you don't have it? Because
Exactly.
I'm tired of fighters doing press conferences and training camp went well and I'm looking forward to Saturday night, which I understand is a reasonable response, but as a fan buying,
well, and it's hard too, because MMA and boxing, like any combat sport, that's really the only sport where you have to add that entertainment side of it. Like if you're playing basketball, it's just based off the numbers. It doesn't matter. Like you're going to get you're going to get off the bench and get recognized for just playing well. Like you can't just do that in the UFC. There's plenty of good fighters that people don't care about, right? Like look at Demetrius Johnson, one of the best fighters of all time. Most casual fans don't really care too much for him because he wasn't like a big personality, unfortunately, which sucks, but that's part of it, right? Like Colby Covington's more known than Demetrius Johnson. Isn't that that's crazy if you think about
it? It is crazy, but I think it's, you have the John Jones of the world who is very dominant and don't need to trash talk. Even for him, he's had his rivalries with Daniel Cormier, and they've had their fun and all that stuff. But I think ultimately, the fans crave, we live in that social media area. So now you're looking for the stuff that goes viral. What goes viral? A press conference when a fighter is humble, or a Conor McGregor trash talker. So I don't know. I think it's not going to change. And until fans demand different, it's not going to change, So, I know you got to run. So we're going to wrap this up. I got one question for you, or at least one hypothetical for you, So
let's hear it.
A lot of people talking about UFC 300, right? Everybody's talking about everybody and their grandmother. So I know you did a live stream talking about UFC 300. So I got a proposal for you, because you don't want Jorge Masvidal. You don't want Jorge Masvidal, George St. Pierre coming from retirement. So how about this? There's only one person I do think should come out of retirement or come back to the fight game and headline UFC 300. No, it's not Nate Diaz. It's not Conor McGregor. We don't need him. I think the person who ran out Francis Ngannou from the UFC, the guy that John Jones won't rematch because he's too afraid. Parker Porter, 300. What do you think?
There you go. Yeah, you got to bring Parker Porter back. Yeah, there was early stoppage in that first fight. No, for sure. I like that. Hey, good factoid. That's a lot of people forget that Parker Porter. So for those who don't know, Parker Porter released from the UFC recently, but fought John Jones in like his third or fourth pro fight. Good dude, Parker Porter, one of the nicest guys you'll ever talk to in the UFC.
Yeah, I love Parker Porter. It's just a nice.
I thought you were going to say Brock Lesnar, actually, because I hear everyone talking about Brock coming back. Him and Ronda, I don't think they're coming back. Like, you make so much more money pro wrestling. Why on earth would you come back to a bunch of fans that aren't going to appreciate you and get paid less? Like, it just, to me, it doesn't make any sense. And same with George. Like, he's retired. Let's just make a good card. Take some of those fights off UFC 298 and 299, put them on 300. Just make a good quality card. We don't need to try and bring back Nick Diaz or anything like that. Like, just leave it. Like, make good fights and people will watch. It's as simple as that.
I don't know. I could see Nick Diaz showing up, but I'm not. That's a conversation for another time. So, James, I know you got to run. You got other stuff to do. Where can people find? Obviously, I know Lynch on Sports.
Well, everyone should know Lynch on Sports. Everything. Yeah, it's very easy. So I appreciate. Well, first off, thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I like the variety of questions. That's always better than just the typical fight stuff, which is great. But yeah, everything's Lynch on Sports. So Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, even youtube.com/LynchOnSports. I do a ton of work for a bunch of different companies, but everything lives on my YouTube channel. I have all my interviews on playlists, so they're easy to find. Just, it's easier than having to figure out which outlet took what interview or whatever. So yeah, that's where you can find all my stuff. I usually go live Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays on my channel. So if you guys have ever want to join one of my live streams, I'd love to have you. We don't charge for questions or anything. I'm just very happy to interact with you guys and talk some fights and all that fun stuff. So that's pretty much it. And yeah, more importantly, thank you for having me on, man. This was awesome.
Yes, thank you, James. I appreciate you taking the time. And like I always say, a helping hand is a better hand. Your links will be in the description. So if anybody want to check out James's stuff, definitely give it a watch. You're not gonna, you don't want to miss anything. And before you go, James, I had something I was going to say to you. It's all right. You're Canadian. It doesn't matter. No, I'm kidding.
Well, let's hear it. What is it? You piqued my interest.
But I'm curious, real quick.
Yeah,
I'm a John Jones fan, and I know you've talked about John Jones and Stipe. A lot of people have.
Yeah.
Are you not Are you not excited about them fighting at least for the UFC heavyweight championship at all?
I don't mind that fight. I think it's two big names. I'm curious to see how Stipe looks after this huge layoff and him being older. I do think John wins probably pretty handily, but like I don't mind seeing that fight. I get more annoyed. Like it's funny you bring that up. I get more annoyed with people who say they don't want to see that fight, or people who think that like John or Stipe will fight Tom Aspinall. Like why on earth would they do that? This is the fight for both of them. It makes a ton of sense. Stipe would rather lose to John Jones than lose to Tom Aspinall. At least he loses to John Jones. You lose to one of the best of all time. At least he even gets to fight John Jones. And for John Jones, hey, I just beat the best heavyweight of all time. You know what I mean? Like regardless of the layoff and the age and all that stuff, that's what John's looking at. He beats Tom Aspinall. No one cares. Really, they don't. Like John's accomplished so much. He could retire right now and not even take that Stipe fight. He's still going to be a legend. But if he lost to Tom Aspinall or even risked that, there's no upside to that. So John and Stipe, I think, will fight. I look forward to that fight when it happens, and I think John wins. But again, like I don't think that fight is as bad as everyone else thinks it is. My only gripe is I think Tom's the real heavyweight champion right now. I think because John, I think regardless of what happens with Stipe and John, they're done after this. So why? Let's just get the big secret out of the way now. Just make it a regular fight and give Tom Aspinall the heavyweight title and move this division along because it's being stalled right now.
That's a fair point. Maybe it's because I'm a little biased, so I always root for Bones Jones. For me, it was just something that keeps irking me because every time I open up Twitter and I read comments, I see people, oh, John Jones, Stipe wash and old, they don't deserve it. But I'm like,
well, more so Stipe. I think people were pretty impressed with John. I was actually at that fight, the one with Cyril Gane. I mean, people were like, oh my God, like all this layoff and you come back and you finish Cyril Gane that quickly. Very impressive.
No, you're right, but I think recently, once the fight in Madison Square Garden got postponed, I see a lot of people. Oh, John Jones only fought one time, and Cyril Gane is a chump. He was never that good anyway. It's just and then on top,
you don't need to listen to those people. Those people don't watch fights, obviously. Like if they're having takes like that, they need to go educate themselves a little bit for sure. So.
That's right. But thank you, James. I appreciate it. I won't keep you. If you ever want to come back on, let me know. We'll do it again.
Well, you just slide in my DMs again and we'll see what happens. I mean, this was fun, right? So I appreciate it. Anytime.
Whoa,
you know where to find me.
This ain't tender, James. Don't slide in DMs here. No, I'm kidding.
It's all good. Or you got my email, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's all good. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, James. Have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.